I'd like to call the committee of the whole meeting for Tuesday, July 11th to order. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk is absent. Alderman Telako? Alderman Meyer? Here. Alderman Hancher?
Here.
Alderman Bach? Here. Alderman Parrish is absent. Alderman Schneider? Alderman Gebhardt?
Present.
Mayor Nervin?
Here. First up, we have approval of the meeting minutes from June 13th.
Second. Move approval.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. Next, we have a couple of discussion items. First is policy discussion related to industrial land uses. So Director Tollefson's going to give us a little overview of this. Just as a little bit of a preamble, this is a item I brought to Economic Development to start working on. It stemmed out of some of our prior meetings on land uses adjacent to our existing industrial area, where we've been getting proposals for residential type uses, but this body was a little hesitant to approve anything. I'm not saying those were the right proposals, but approve anything in that direction until we had a longer term solution for more industrial zoned land, because that was the last industrial zoned land in that area. So this is a foray into looking at what we can do about that problem. So take it away, Kim.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I think that was a great introduction. So the Economic Development Board and staff have been evaluating locations for industrial land use opportunities, looking at our existing sites. So that policy analysis started in January of 2023. We are to a point where if we want to advance the policy analysis and move towards some form of implementation, there's some additional resources that are going to be needed, including just staff analysis. And so it's a great opportunity at this point to check in with the Common Council and share with you what we've learned so far, and for you to give us some direction about continuing to move forward, and to what extent, if so. As part of the last several weeks, we have reached out to property owners that are located within the subject study area, just to make sure they understood that this conversation was happening, that there was no immediate, final or formal actions being taken here tonight, but that we would continue to have the dialogue with them as if we moved forward with the conversation. So again, we're looking for some specific input from the Common Council tonight, and the memo outlined that, but essentially looking to substantiate the zoning districts in both of the locations that we're discussing, in particular locations, be able to master plan utilities and infrastructure, and then conversion of some existing industrial zoning space. So the first study area and scope includes the area at the very southwest portion of the city. So this is County Line Road, this is Granville, this is Dungeness Bay, and this is Wasaki. This is the village of Germantown, and this is the city of Milwaukee. The study area tries to stay south of what is a very substantial critical environmental area. This includes wetlands, woodlands, some drainage courses that feed into the Little Menominee. There's one parcel that extends north of that critical environmental feature, but the Economic Development Board would recommend that we would continue to, or we would maintain some split zoning on that parcel. So everything to the north of the critical environmental feature is mostly single-family residential 5-acre minimum lot sizes. In the areas that are gray here, that is the existing zoning. The light gray is B5, which is our current light industrial zoning district, and the parcels in the darker gray are zoned what is called rural industrial. And when I talk about substantiating the zoning, the rural industrial zoning district only allows as a permitted use a roadside farmer's market, like a farmer's roadside stand. All of the other industrial uses in the rural industrial district are conditional. So they're allowed, they just have to go through the Planning Commission process to allow for approval. In terms of the context of this particular area, there's about 295 acres that's zoned for that industrial type of use. The area surrounding this and some of the uses within this, this study area include petroleum, waste collection, storage facilities, a variety of contracting, warehousing, trucking, manufacturing, and some office. As part of our analysis, we did reach out to Milwaukee 7 and Ozaki County Economic Development Corporation, and they both had really positive feedback about its location in the market and its location in the context of the regional area. And the reason why they talk about it being a prime location is because it's convenient transportation access to Interstate 41, Highway 45, and it's has access to a large labor pool, both for Waukesha County, North Milwaukee County, and then south of Washington County, as well as Ozaki County. And then in terms of adjacency, there is a lot of new industrial development and office and research that's happening along the highway corridor, everything from office park to true manufacturing. If anyone has been north on 41 at the Holy Hill exit, there is a substantial amount of industrial development that's occurring in the village of Germantown, and they have a TIF district for that. And there's consideration both in Germantown and Richfield at that north end of that corridor to consider an additional 600 acres for industrial development. So where we're at right now is the Economic Development Board has reviewed a laundry list of uses. We compared those uses to our existing zoning districts and the types of uses that are allowed in some of the adjacent communities. The trend has been to move a little bit more towards medium level or type of industrial operations, but also to control certain thresholds as it relates to odor and pollution and noise. When we look at the draft technical standards at a FAR, floor area ratio of 50%, and discounting all of the critical environmental features in the study area, there's the potential for 9 million square feet. The reason why this is important is because when we talk about infrastructure needs as it relates to sewer and water, the engineers need to understand what kind of development is going to happen there in terms of use and the capacity based on the amount of square footage in that area. It also helps us better understand what type of road conditions we need in terms of trip generation. Public water would be critical. All of these new structures would require fire protection, but in talking with M7 and Ozaki County Economic Development, it's really the expectation of the private market to have access to public water. In that case, there is a contract amendment that would be needed with the city of Milwaukee for an additional connection to public water. Public sewer, while less critical probably to the private market than the public water, it's still highly desirable. There are some examples, especially in Ozaki and Washington County, where TIF districts have been created for industrial uses and public water has been provided, but not public sewer. And those industrial parks have lagged. The Public Works Department has began the assessment of how to serve this area with public sewer. Unfortunately, it cannot be served with gravity service alone. So in order to advance our work, there's some additional analysis that would need to be done in terms of location, sizing, depth of those sewer mains. As you are all probably familiar now, the master planning associated with expansion of the sewer service area is a 6 to 9 month process because we have to get approval from various other governmental entities. In terms of the public roads, those are all rated as good to very good. In my discussions with a few of the property owners in the study area, they indicate that the internet service is extremely poor. So I think that is something that we would have to further assess. Of course, private companies looking to invest are going to have an expectation. And then partnerships, not only with roads, sewer, and water, are all going to be required with a variety of governmental entities, including Washington County, the village of Germantown, city of Milwaukee. So in terms of this particular location, the next steps would be for the Common Council to have consideration of additional sewer service analysis and also consider the timing of that. There would be consultant analysis that would be needed, though funding for that contract is not currently budgeted in the 2023 budget. So if that's something that the Common Council would like us to consider now, we'd have to come back with not only a contract, but opportunities on how we would make that expenditure, or is that something that you want to plan for the 2024 budget? After the sewer analysis, and depending on the results of that, there could be the petition for the sewer service expansion. And while we're waiting during that 6 to 9 month process for the sewer service expansion, we could initiate those partnerships related to roads and water. We could come back to the Common Council and talk about the financial policy or strategy associated with the infrastructure, or are we going to continue to promote, developer, build, and contribute? We can finalize the zoning, and then we can talk about other ancillary programs or features for what could be the business park. The second location, and as the mayor mentioned, it's somewhat of a concurrent conversation due to the two residential development proposals that were brought forward in the area, what I would say south central to Mequon and immediately south of our current business parks. This is south of Dungeness Bay, west of Bear Road, and north of County Line. There's about 110 acres. It is currently zoned for a mix of light industrial and residential. That is also the current mix of the uses in the area. Lily Lane Preserve, Trinity Creek are in the area. The 110 acres does have a substantial condition of woodlands and wetlands, floodways, prairie fields. To the south, as I showed in that map, much of this area south of Lily Lane, it's a substantial parcel. It's undeveloped. It's currently being farmed. Historically, there was a conservation subdivision proposed for that site as well. It's adjacent to the village of Brown Deer single-family neighborhoods on the south side of County Line Road. This is an area that was identified in the 2035 comp plan. Because of its variety of uses, there was some direction that the city wanted to look at this as a neighborhood land use analysis. The residential use as a transition from either commercial or industrial has been a proven land use pattern in the city of Mequon in the past. The overview of this particular area is that staff thinks that there is an opportunity for a mix of residential development. The past proposals have been anywhere from a little over 1 unit per acre to just under 3 units per acre. Some of those proposals suggested a yield value of the development at $68 million. There is public water access. Public sewer service area is located for the majority of this study area. Some portions of it further to the south are not in the sewer service area. It also cannot be served by gravity alone, and master planning for that public sewer is a little bit more challenged because we have private systems and lift stations both to the east and the west serving development that is along Dungeness Bay and the industrial uses to the east and west as well. So I just put up here just as a reminder of what those couple residential proposals look like. There was higher density residential development proposed at the north end with some single family to the south, obviously taking advantage of the open space and environmental features as part of the overall site. These were two separate development proposals by two separate companies, but they were very similar in their opportunity to take advantage of some of those features on the land. This is the utility map. Everything shaded in the green with the blue outline is what is included in the sewer service area. So, the study area that has been discussed before or proposed for single-family residential is all of this. So you can see, about a little over half is in the sewer service area, and this other portion is not. So that's what I have as an overview. I think we're looking for feedback on whether you want to advance those industrial discussions and what is, your perspective or input on how to move forward with further utility analysis.
And I'd add that we have a couple members of our Economic Development Board Committee here as well, if there's any questions for them. They've been spearheading most of this effort to this point, but we want to get it in front of you for more direction and input at this point before we go much farther. So welcome any comments anyone has. Alderman Schneider.
First of all, I think the southwest corner is desirable for this use, not only for the transportation piece, but also because on Economic Development Board, we struggled for a long time with our current companies that might want to expand and didn't have labor. So I think the combination of access to transportation and a much bigger labor pool that doesn't need transportation up to Mequon, which was one of the challenges we were trying to help companies overcome, would be very helpful. I'm interested in knowing something, if we're going to move forward on this, about the competition in the area, which exists, and I don't know what they're selling their land for, and I don't know what services they're offering. So I think just at a minimum, which is easily obtainable information even on the staff level, it would be really helpful to know, because we're looking at a pretty costly infrastructure plan if we're moving forward with this, if the city is going to be funding the plan. And I think that the people that have been on the council a while remember the business park that exists here and the kind of challenges we had when we put the infrastructure in because of the economic changes around that time. It didn't grow as rapidly as was anticipated, honestly, and stayed rather slow growing, although grew. And I just would not like to relive that by the kind of dollars that we'd be looking at to try to bring sewer, particularly to this area. So that's one of my concerns, being competitive with the marketplace for that corner of the city. And I'm a little, I'm just was trying to put it together in my mind how we would do this efficiently, because on the one hand, I mean, you have to time it perfectly for a, say, as Alderman Parrish often says, what if some huge company wants to come to Mequon? This process is long. The process is long to get the utilities in place, and it would be hard to know when the time is to move forward on that if we wanted to do it in advance of development. So that's my main concern, is just the logistics and the marketplace, and what we'd need to know about what this kind of land would have to be developed as to make it worthwhile.
And we've certainly talked about that, but that presumes we'd finance it all up front, which is one of about half a dozen options. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. I think what we need guidance on is, are we interested in this conceptually to develop it a little bit more so we can get an idea of what those costs are, and then you can analyze different funding models. Where do you do it all up front? Do you wait for the first big guy to come in and do it? Do you do it incrementally? There's a bunch of different ways to structure it. Part of it's going to probably be dictated by water access too, which will probably go east to west over time, unless someone wants to put a water main in all the way from the corner to the end and do the first development on the western portion. So it will be self-regulating at some point. But yeah, we have to get more info to get even some numbers to play with. And I don't know that we have to time it perfectly either. This is more of a long-term play in our city's financial future, because we have a lot of assessed value, but we don't have a ton of assessed value in the industrial space, and industrial users consume very little service, and they pay a lot in taxes. So that's good for everyone who lives here. It keeps part of that tax levy burden spread onto corporations and businesses and not single-family owners. So it's more of a long-term play in my view, but certainly timing could go south. But I don't know. None of us has a crystal ball either. Alderman Meyer.
Oh, sorry. When you're talking about medium-sized industries, what are you talking about?
Well, it was really more like medium intensity, in terms of, most of what we have in our business park as permitted uses is really light industrial. So let me, I think there was the draft use table in here. So obviously light manufacturing, processing, wholesale distribution, research and development, we wouldn't want to turn that away. Specialty trade, lumber, building supply, transportation terminals, warehousing. Let's see. There's some ancillary uses like, fitness centers. Yeah, that's really the list.
Okay.
As part of that, let me look at a couple other, commercial bakeries, obviously corporate campuses, high tech corp with headquarters. I mean, I don't know that you're going to get that. There was a conversation at the Economic Development Board of whether we wanted it to really be office and high tech versus processing. And I think with the surrounding context of the oil fields and some of the other industrial uses, the waste management, the violas, it was presumed to be a little less desirable for more of the corporate campus type setting, and to offer a few more medium intensity type uses than what's currently allowed in our light industrial district.
Well, pertaining to the whole thing, I'm not overly enthusiastic about it. I'm not dead set against it, but I'm just not overly enthusiastic about the fact of, one of these people that you don't need to have every square inch of the city developed or have residential on it. We spent a lot of time in discussing like Ilio Creek area, different central areas for development for residential and that. We put that out to the public to get their opinions on that. Just not the landowners, on that part. We sent it out. We had the survey that was centered on a lot of that type of development inside of that, what the residents wanted to do. I know we're discussing on having a survey coming up, hopefully soon. We have a schedule for Committee of the Whole to talk about that, to have another citywide survey. And I think before we would move forward with any type of movement inside that we would let the residents key in on this and get their input on what they would like to see. I think I think city staff and I think planning did a really great job when they did the last survey and got the responses from the people and that. And I think that's very important that we do the same thing this time again and let people know what we're thinking. The infrastructure cost is just, phenomenal for probably all those places to get that started. Do we put that in to attract people, or do we say here with the zoning, we'll be willing to, do the infrastructure if the business is coming? So where do you start on that, chicken or the egg, in doing that? But I think, and looping back, I think the most important thing for us to do is to include the residents now in finding out what they want to see happen inside that areas.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you did reach out to several property owners in the proposed area already and got feedback from the property owners.
Yeah, we did issue a letter to the property owners within this study area and offered individual meetings and discussions with them. I would say I've probably talked to half of them at this point. And we made them aware of the meeting tonight in case they had an interest in checking out the packet or coming tonight. And I did indicate to those that I talked to that I'd be following up with them later this week, depending on, to provide them with information about tonight's discussion.
And what has the reception been like to the concept to date?
Well, I think for those that, own the property, already understand that it's zoned industrial. Some of them have shared prospective development proposals that they have received over the years and wanted to know whether that really aligned with what the city's vision is for potential uses. Other property owners are already operating light industrial uses and just wanted to make sure that as they continue to operate, that they wouldn't become non-conforming, and wanting to make sure they're protecting also their, the value in their land for potential sale at some point.
Alderman Bach.
I think I'm interested in it conceptually as well, but I agree with Alderman Mayer. You know, there should be some visioning there. You know, I don't know, it has to be the same thing as Eleo Creek, but getting some input on development there. I have just a side question too, and maybe this is for the city administrator. But as the city develops in that area and on that west side, I mean, the city is so large, and what is it, 48, 49 square acres, but how do you factor in, I mean, I hear a lot about the sewer and the water and the roads and all that, but how do you figure out, as you develop these subdivisions in these areas, how do you do on the public safety side? How do you decide, do we need, because of all this, we're going to need one or two more, to hire more officers? And how does that in the planning, or what's the threshold for that, since you're, you know, if people are dealing with something on Port Washington Road and then have to go to the other side, how do you deal with that and decide, all right, you know, we're going to do this, but there's going to be a public safety part of this as well that you're going to have to look at too.
Well, I'll jump in, and certainly Director Tollefson can add any additional comments, but relative to police and fire, just from a recent history perspective, the city convened a couple of staffing analyses back in 2017, the 2018 timeframe, for both the police and the fire departments. And part of those analyses took a look at staffing levels and what were the appropriate staffing levels for the community with a population at the time of about 23,000 or so residents. There were some conversations had at this level during subsequent budget discussions, and some adjustments have been made relative to those findings. Those studies are available for review and have continued to guide our staffing response in those two departments. And as you know, on the fire and EMS side, we're in kind of a ramp-up period from a full-time staffing perspective, so we recognize there are needs there, and I think you'll continue to see growth on the staffing side in the years to come.
I would just add with the town center redevelopment proposal and the zoning, prior to adopting the rezoning, there was more of that fiscal analysis impact done in terms of city operations. We don't historically do that on an individual development type basis. Like every time a subdivision comes forward, it's handled more than incrementally as we check in on operations and do facilities and department operational assessments.
The good news is that new development does pay tax, which creates revenue, which makes adding services like that possible. So, and I'm assuming that 9 million square feet of light industrial would add far more tax than it would consume in service. That's typically what industrial uses do. We don't spend a lot of time there. If this was 9 million square feet of retirement homes, we'd have to add a lot to the fire department.
It's that the hotspots for those fire and EMS calls are typically your senior housing developments.
Yeah. Alderman Hancher, sorry, brain freeze there.
This is my district, so I'm very in tune to it. One thing I would like you to do is, you talk about getting feedback from the community. I would like you to possibly for Huntington Park, because that's like right there, to get possible feedback from them. I'm actually in support of this, going forward to seeing what can be done. Just to the north of this area, about a mile north to the west, Germantown has a industrial park that has attracted national companies, and I could see that happening with this particular one, because right now there's really if you go on down County Line Road, you have the petroleum, right, and then you also have a refrigeration company that just expanded, and then you have the waste management right there. So I do think that for that particular area, for the southern part, it would make sense to have some kind of industrial area with that. So, but I do want to make sure that Huntington Park was notified, see if they have any kind of insight to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions or direction? I'm sensing maybe most people are generally okay with getting a little more info and moving forward to continue to study it? Maybe by show of hands, is that generally the consensus? Yeah, okay. So I think we can move forward and get some sharpen the pencil on some numbers, and then to Alderman Schneider's point, develop some conceptual funding models, approaches to cracking the nut here. Do we go in all at once? Do we wait for the first big guy with, have an intent to put it in the ground and wait for the first big development to do it? There's a bunch of different ways. You could do developer build and contribute. All of them have pros and cons.
Well, the first step that we'll need to do is advance the sewer analysis. And that would require some assistance from a consultant. So the question would be to put together, I guess, a draft RFP for that analysis and return to the Common Council with a resolution that would authorize the expenditure to pay for the consulting services. So we'd have to sharpen our pencil on where those funds need to come from, unless the Committee of the Whole would ask us to defer that so that you can plan for that in the 2024 budget. Once we have the sewer analysis, we have a better understanding of what the infrastructure estimated costs would be. We can compare that to the types of land uses, the amount of square footage of those types of operations, get the comparative analysis from land sales, cost per square footage or value per square footage from the assessor's office, looking at things regionally. Then we'll have a better understanding of potential revenue versus cost. And I think that's going to be able to put us in a better position to make a decision about the financial. And if the sewer analysis comes back and it's extremely high, then I don't know that we want to put ourselves in a position to ask for the sewer service amendment, right?
Sure.
We'd want the analysis and then make the decision to petition to serve this area.
So what are folks' thoughts on this? I know we're in the middle of the beginning of budget season here, so that's going to consume a lot of staff time for the next couple of months, but how about budgeting for this in 2024, and then we can get through budget and then have an RFP ready to go so that someone could do the study early in 2024. Alderman Schneider.
I just wanted to go back to the water issue. That seems more straightforward to me, but it seems like it's dependent on our ability to convince Milwaukee to give us another access point to obtain water from their system. So is that accurate?
It could also be served from the second connection that is to ultimately be installed with the Swan Ridge Farms development. It's just a significant amount of water main to get to the Southwest Industrial area then that would have no users on it unless the Huntington Park Private Water Trust was interested in connecting to water.
So is there a way to reach out to, without officially requesting a new line from Milwaukee? Is there a way to just find out whether they'd be open to the idea if we requested that? I'm just curious because I think that would be much more straightforward.
I would only caution that's a little bit of a political hotbed because you are creating potential competing uses and then asking them to service them with water. That said, they are a water utility that has an abundance of water to sell. So from an economic standpoint, them being able to sell more water for more uses is certainly to their advantage. It's really more of a political conversation than a infrastructure one. And so I might just caution the timing of that versus your decision making and moving forward. For reference or for context, we had in the original contract that second connection, but you may recall that we requested an amendment to change the location of that second connection as a part of that Swan Ridge Farms development, which in the end was met with little to no resistance from the Milwaukee Waterworks. So I don't necessarily mean to imply that there would be a resistance to it. I just think that you may want to have some more information before you start making those inquiries.
I think we don't want to jerk their chain too much. Yeah. I don't think it'll be a huge problem, but we don't want to come back with 1,000 requests and become annoying. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's certainly sellers in other places that they connect or are adjacent to. A number of other communities have either been in talks or, like Waukesha, for example, is obviously getting their water through Milwaukee, and there's a couple other communities that are in talks with them as well. So
This should be far less controversial than watering Waukesha. Any other feedback for staff?
If I may, Mayor, ask the committee of the whole one. So I'm hearing 2024, prepare for it this end of this year, budgeting for 2024 and going forward. In terms of the location that we talked about, that's south central to the city, does the committee of the whole feel as though that needs to run concurrent with the decision making for the southwest location? Or is there interest in converting that industrial zoning to residential just based on the merits, standing on its own?
Does anyone have any feelings on that? I think my feeling on it is we've had that land zoned industrial for a good long time, and it hasn't developed for a lot of reasons. It's not that desirable. And if the market's telling us that they'd rather see it residential and we're open to it being residential, we should take some action on that. Otherwise, it'll just sit vacant forever, and we've got landowners tied up with land they can't develop, and there's clearly demand. I don't think we're likely to see anything industrial go there. It's been 30 years. It will be another 30 years. Alderman Meyer.
I'm not interested in the fact of having a ton of housing going inside that area. There is in the last survey, there was X amount of people that residents wanted to have inside the city. What was kind of the perfect number inside there, and we're kind of pushing up against the number inside for it. Especially since, when you're taking a look at, you're looking at doing 1.2 to maybe 2.2 something acres inside of that.
Well, that's not what we're looking to do. That's what's been proposed. We can decide what level of density is correct.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I was saying that, I'd be more in favor of it if you started to have, larger lot sizes that would be inside of that area, I think it'd be appreciative, also of the, other residents inside there, so that it doesn't have as much effect on, the public services that we have in that. The larger lot sizes would help out a lot inside of that area for it, and also schools for it. So I think that if we went that way with residential, I'd be more favorable for it if it was larger lot sizes than smaller, and just trying to push everybody inside of a small area over there for it.
I think if we're open to doing it, we should do it the way we want to see it develop and then stick to it, and rather than have proposals come in for things that
Well, the
push
key
the
to
envelope.
is stick to it is what
Yeah,
the key is, because, we get some proposal that comes through and all of a sudden everybody goes, now we're gonna go half-acre houses,
Well, I
everybody
think
goes,
part
"Okay."
of the reason we didn't take action on those previous proposals is they were just too dense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that we were totally opposed to the idea conceptually, but that's the sense I got out of those last couple of hearings. There was one alderman who's not here tonight who was really worried about not having any more industrial land, which kicked off the other conversation, but I'm less worried about that because I don't think it's going to happen anyway, or it would have happened by now. Is that a arm raise? Okay, Alderman Talaco.
Okay, so looking at this map, I don't really understand exactly where all this open land is for this industrial use. Being that we put in the Foxtown development that kind of changed our original industrial zone in Mequon, so there's going to be a need and a place for it, but can the Ozaki Washington Land Trust, is that conservation that can't be built on?
Yep, they have a conservation easement over that area. So the 295 is the net acreage.
Because then I see a wayside nursery, which obviously they want land for growing their trees and stuff. So we'd have to think about development and waste and byproduct. And I guess if you're the interest in like changing it so it's not rural industrial into light industrial might be just a good first step to make it all that and kind of see where it goes from there versus trying to put in sewer and everything.
Well, light industrial typically requires sewer. No one really wants to deal with holding tanks. That's, I think Director Tollefson explained that earlier. There's some of the other business parks that have been done to the north on 4145 that didn't provide sewer have failed to build out. They've languished. So then you've invested in roads and other infrastructure and it never gets built out because you don't have the sewer is what really makes it attractive.
Yeah, I would just say, like, looking at the map, it doesn't look like there's enough open land to warrant the city paying for sewage out there as far as what's already placed out on the map.
Yeah, the city doesn't necessarily have to pay for the utility expansion. That's a decision that would be forthcoming. And those are property owner decisions, right? So anybody can choose to develop their property in accordance with the zoning that's in place. Now, the OWLT has a conservation easement. We're not going to change that acreage. But when you're talking about the potential of 9 million square feet, even if Wayside Nurseries, chooses to continue to have their nursery operations there, which is great, it's good soil conditions out there, you're still talking about the potential, I guess, for substantial square footage.
Yeah, the figures that were presented were off the buildable land, not the conservation land, not the OWLT land. There's more land than that. There's close to 600 acres, 500 or 600. The buildables, the 295.
Yeah, I mean this parcel here. Oh. The parcel that I had talked about that it extends north of the critical environmental feature, that's 90 acres.
For reference.
Yeah.
Yeah, and would stay residential.
The north piece would, but the entire parcel, extends south.
It's just
of
listed in the
critical
study area because that's one contiguous piece of land that someone owns. So you would just have different zoning on the north half than it would on the south half.
It's an okay strategy. I'm not necessarily saying that this is bad, but we have it zoned rural industrial. That allows for the only permitted use allowed is agriculture, right? That's a little when you're talking to property owners or you're talking to people in the private market, right? And you're advertising that it's rural industrial, but you really only give ag uses. It's a little contradictory, right? But all of the conditional uses that are allowed in the rural residential district the rural industrial district are very similar to our existing light industrial. So people would have the opportunity to come forward right now and propose multiple uses. It's just, do you want to see it develop based on potential demand that's in the regional market? And do we want to really be true to form, I guess, in what we're suggesting the city is allowing in this area? And if so, and depending on the pace of development that you would like to see, we would need to think about the infrastructure then. So I guess I'm hearing a little, I'm not sure I'm hearing consensus one way or the other about the central area. If you want us to hold off on evaluating or bringing forward city initiative zoning changes for that central location until we make some further decisions about the South Central, or if you'd like us to advance those in the near term.
So why don't we have a straw poll by show of hands? Who's interested in evaluating residential uses for that land now and doing it in a manner that's consistent with what we want to see built there, not what the market would necessarily give us? Doing that now versus later, I'm more of a now.
I saw 5.5.
Yeah, willing to consider it, yeah.
We'll have to work it into our work program, but I mean, it just gives us better direction if that's something we're planning for over the next, 3 to 6 months, or if we're really looking at, Q1 or Q2 of 2024. One of the things we talked about with the proposals that came forward, we've had 2 proposals come forward. Both were somewhat, told to kind of go away. We can only say, go away so many times before we're not going to get that opportunity anymore. So if there is interest, I think we take the opportunity to make those changes, set the table for what the city really wants, and then that alleviates a lot of those policy discussions at the time that the proposal's in front of you.
And rezoning it in the way would like to see it develop would communicate our clear intent to what we want to see when proposals come back. Now, when it's industrial and you're converting it to residential, like it's the sky's the limit because, well, you're changing it so you can have anything you want there. So the market will propose the most dense thing because they'll make the most money, and that's what happens.
Yeah.
But if we rezoned it and made it, something more like we'd like to see, then proposals can come forward and that can get built, and there doesn't have to be any delay.
Okay, great. We'll do some analysis on that and bring it forward. Thank you.
Any other last words on that, or we should move on to our next topic? We're pushing up the end of the committee of the whole and the beginning of the common council meeting. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
The next item was proposed implementation plan for the 2022 class and comp study. So Assistant Administrator Schoeneman's going to give us an update on where we're at with that.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'll dive right on in. Going through the compensation study, and as we continue to progress through its recommendations, there's some general guiding principles that we've tried to keep in mind. We want to do our best to make sure we're maintaining equity amongst our various employee groups. So talking unionized staff, non-unionized, and groups like our Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS department. Additionally, we want the organization to be able to index its pay ranges or scale each year by inflation or a like measure to ensure that the ranges that we provide are marketable to talent so we can attract employees to the city and provide a adequate range for long-term employees to progress through. And the city has gone down the path of having that based on individual performance or a merit-based system with annual wage adjustments. And that transition really started back in 2014 when the city had done a different study that got rid of the STEP programs that were once in place and created the open ranges that employees then advanced through. And in 2018, we introduced a merit and COLA system to start advancing employees through their pay grade, and then that system was in place for 19 and 20. But in 2021, due to impacts of COVID and the larger markets, the organization can only afford to do a lesser amount in 2021. But since then, we've been working towards providing more in terms of annual adjustments for non-representative staff, which about the same time we engaged GovHR to take a look at what our pay scales are, our philosophy, and how we're progressing staff through their pay ranges to make sure that we're doing right by the organization and employees and well in the market. So this study culminated in the report that was enclosed in the packet tonight, and just thinking about the study, I think it boils down into three areas of recommendations from GovHR. Some of it that we've already begun implementing here as an organization, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in detail on the next slide, which includes the new pay plans and wage adjustments. There's some short-term recommendations in the report related to longevity and resuming merit adjustments. And longer term, the organization needs to look at employee advancement and something that we're kind of coining range adjustments as well. In terms of what we've done so far, back in April, the Common Council approved the current pay plan that's in place from GovHR that puts all employees in new ranges. If employees fell within their range, or their compensation did already, they were slotted in as such per the study. And if employees were below the minimum of their new pay range, they were brought up into that range as suggested at the minimum step by GovHR. And there's roughly 20 employees in that boat. And that was fully funded with money set aside in this year's budget. And last time I was here, I projected it would be about $49,000. Ended up costing a little less because we had one retirement. And just wanted to point out that $47,000 impacts is stretched between the state's operating budget and the sewer budget, just since we have employees divided between the two. So that's where we're at now, and then gets in next is to what recommendations come next from GovHR. One of their next recommendations that they suggest we consider is providing a one-time longevity salary adjustment to employees who have worked with the city for a number of years in these ranges of 3 to 8, 8 to 15, and over 15 of, and the corresponding percent changes of 1, 2, or 3%. The intent behind these adjustments is largely twofold. One, when we brought employees into their range, we created a little bit of impression of employees who've been here longer. So we're adjusting to correct that, and also address employees who may not have progressed over their career with the merit system that was in place, to where we'd ideally like them to be with their years of service. So GovHR still recommends the city provide an annual COLA, or cost of living adjustment, and a merit increase on top of that. And that merit increase is what then will continue to move employees through their pay band. And the study suggests that could be a 1 to 3% each year, depending on the city's fiscal condition from year to year. So that COLA would still then get used to index our pay bands, and it's the merit piece really on top that moves people through. So in an ideal world, the system would advance employees organically year over year, but that may not always be the case. And just looking at our staffing data, I think that's a phenomenon that's happened here at the city over the last several years. You can see employees whose years of service are trending higher, such as 8 years almost, are still floating largely around the bottom quartile and aren't progressing up. The two higher dots you see up there are former dispatchers who stayed on with the city after the merger as administrative staff in our police department. If you take the next pay grade up, you can kind of see that clustering again occurring here. And the 5 employees you see in the top corner are 20-plus year employees in our public works department who are here back when there was a STEP program. So what we're getting at is the merit system, if it's able to be funded year over year, has the likelihood of advanced employees through their band. If it can't, it would behoove the city, we think, to have a mechanism that allow the organization to provide some adjustments. So what we're suggesting here is adding an element that would allow the city to look at specific year milestones, or suggesting every 6 years, to see how an employee is doing. If they have not organically made it to Q1, for instance, by their 6th year or completion of their 6th year, the city could provide an adjustment assuming that they have satisfactory better performance to that Q1. And then you could do it again at 12 years, and then another 6 years at 18. So in less than 20 years, employees with this additional element and funds available could progress through their range if they weren't organically. And then over Q3, employees would still be able to progress with merit based on performance. So the next question that kind of comes to mind is, how do all these different elements cost out? And how could could the city step into these recommendations. I prepared a rough costing of what it could cost the city. Makes a lot of assumptions that payroll taxes remain the same, pension contributions remain the same, our employee base remains the same. If we're projecting out with those assumptions, the city could, if it chooses, provide the COLA in 2024 and then look to address GovHR's recommendation in terms of one-time longevity salary increase. Then in 2025, reintroduce the merit component on top of the COLA and start providing the range adjustments there that look at employees every 6 years. The reason there's a larger amount in the first year is there will be some catch-up when we start the range adjustments, but you can see in the future years it would start to level out. And those numbers in the future years could be even less if the merit system on its own advances employees through the pay ranges. So that's a rough idea of how the remaining goals of GovHR could be implemented here at the city. What staff is suggesting could come next, based on feedback tonight, is we would bring forward these implementation steps in future funding meetings with appropriation committee, so allow the Common Council to look at these costs at the same time as its other budget priorities over the next couple years. So with that said, I'd be happy to turn the floor over to the Common Council to just hear your feedback, thoughts on what's being proposed.
Thanks, Justin. Open the floor up. Alderman Bach.
That's a lot there. You know, you could spend 4 hours talking about all of those issues. But I mean, I think the key is that, and the report was well done. I mean, there's a lot of information there, but you really want to, I mean, your employees are your best resource here in the city. So you really want to be able to reward those employees, especially the ones that are working hard. Seems to me that a cost of living adjustment is for sure. And then how do you kind of reward employees, even in that 1 to 8 or 2 to 8 group? You know, you think you'd want some kind of pool to be able to reward them. If somebody's been here 5 or 6 years and they're a very valuable employee, you'd want something in your back pocket to kind of reward those people too. Anyway, I'm gonna ask 2 questions though. One is, you know, I was a little surprised at that cost of living adjustment over the last 6 years. I would have expected it would have been around 3% closer, at least for the last 5 years. And I understand there was all kinds of issues there. But question 1 is that kind of network that you have where you surveyed all the neighboring communities. Will you do that, or have you been doing that? Will you continue to do that for cost of living adjustments so that all the neighboring communities are kind of in the same area for their cost of living adjustments going forward? That's one. And the other question is totally different. It was on something in that report talked about the that FLSA classification, employee classification piece, which is, you know, tricky business, I think. And I don't know where the city stands on all their job descriptions. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because sometimes you have people's title is different than their responsibilities, and you've got exempt and non-exempt employees, and you might have to change somebody from, you know, a salaried exempt to an hourly non-exempt, and how do you make that happen? So what is the city doing on all those job descriptions? Is that kind of completed? Is that an ongoing study? Are you comfortable with that? So those are my 2 questions.
Yep, definitely. So to start with your first question about the annual adjustments provided, the governments are in the state are in tight positions with very strict rules around what we can raise in revenue. So that there's a limited amount we can increase. In a good year, our net new construction is typically our biggest increase in revenue, and that can be 2.5%. Some years it's 1% or 1.5%. So that
Historically, it's been 1.5%. We've had a couple of good years where it's been hovering around 2 or 2.25.
Yeah.
But,
So with the cost centers, all city face to have one exceed our increase in revenues gets quite tricky. So I think it's been a large part of why we've seen the limitations we have. And we've been endeavoring to do more, as you can start to see in the later years. And if the city's revenue picture continues to improve, we are confident we can start to do more year over year. But it's contingent on the funds coming in. The second question you have at FSLA, GovHR has experts who looked at all of our positions. Going into the study too, we provided them with updated job descriptions. Employees gave feedback. Department heads review job descriptions as well. And they looked at all of our titles and make sure the titles align with the duties. And they determined that there's 2 positions that the city needs to look into further, whether or not they should be either remain as a salaried position or switch to an hourly or vice versa. So that's something we'll be doing on a staff end as we progress this year to evaluate those 2 positions, but the rest that, based off GovHR's expertise, is we have them classified correctly.
That's great that you got it down to 2.
Yeah.
But it's hard with that cost of living adjustment, right? Because if it's so low, and salaries get further and further and further behind, and that just kind of accumulates over the years. So you need to have some other levers to pull so you can adjust those salaries, it seems to me. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Alderman Schneider.
I think those must be standard numbers, though, cost of living, correct? Isn't that a standard number? No?
No,
Okay.
they've never lined up here with my experience in private sector. So,
I just had a little bit of a concern about the longevity portion of this, because when we looked at the initial study, there were some employees that, actually I was happy to see that many of the employees are in the appropriate range for their job description. But a few of them were not, and a longevity bonus for being here now isn't really an incentive for anyone because they are here. This is only happening once, so it's not as though they can say, oh, I'll get my longevity bonus if I stay this many more years. So from a logic standpoint, I don't know that it's really helpful to motivate employees to stay with the city, which is one of our main concerns. We've got so many good people. I would rather see that money, if anything, go to the people who have longevity but have not been being reimbursed at the rate that would have been right for them, rather than across the board. Because some people have lagged out of the range of what their appropriate salary is. And I feel like those are the folks, if we have not been paying them appropriately for some years, would benefit more from this money rather than just saying, well, if anybody's in a seat at this date, we're giving you a bonus. It doesn't seem like a great use of the funds to me.
So GovHR I think their intent by this recommendation is that it's a salary adjustment, so it'll go to someone's base wage and it'll be factored in all future years. And all our employees, no matter their tenure was 3 years to 15, have been under the same parameters, and so they're helping us level set is where they're trying to get at, and at the same time also address the compression we made by bringing employees up to the minimum that were below their new pay grade minimums. So that's kind of the general goal of the recommendation.
I would also add, Alderwoman Schneider, from my vantage point, this is sort of a kickstart for any employees that have been here for any number of years that may have been experiencing these lower cost of living adjustments that Alderman Bach just pointed out, where we have not, due to tax levy constraints, other revenue constraints, the fact that we cannot introduce new fees even if we want to because the state doesn't allow it, to help those employees begin the process or continue the process of moving through the newly established ranges that have been adopted as part of this 2023 compensation plan that was before the council back in April. So it's a kickstart. It's a one-time adjustment that would settle into a respective employee's base. Additionally, from my vantage point, one of the criticisms that I heard when I came into this position back in early 2015, on the heels of the city completing its last compensation analysis, was that many of the recommendations included in that study were never implemented, and the city and the Common Council at the time didn't carry through on the consultant's recommendations. I think it would be good business practice for us as an organization to follow through on the recommendations contained in this study. It will send a strong message to our employees that we're not just bringing in consultants to do some work and the study itself is winding up on the shelf. For the dollar amount,
What did we not follow up on? I just don't know. What did we not take into consideration and implement that they suggested?
honestly, I'm not prepared to answer that question here this evening. I'd have
Study
to
in 2015, not this study.
Right, I know, but the one in 2015, I was not aware that we didn't implement the consultants'
There were recommendations that were implemented, but there were other recommendations that were not implemented. And so I'm suggesting that we implement this recommendation relative to the longevity adjustments because it's contained in the study, and to do otherwise, I don't know that it sends a great message to our employees.
Well, I understand the nature of your comment with not doing it across the board, but I think outside of a couple of outliers that Justin showed us, I think it's pretty much an across-the-board problem. And the outliers were caused by a couple of people we absorbed.
Correct.
They were part of the fire or the police department that now have administrative positions that are similar to others that kind of, because of they're in the police department, they ended up on the higher side. But I think those are the outliers, not the general population.
Yep. And some very tenured employees in other areas like public works, but those are 20-plus year employees. Additionally, each pay range has a maximum and will not exceed the maximum of those pay ranges year over year. So if someone's adjustment as they progress goes over their maximum, we would look to cap their salary at that point and then provide them a cash compensation for the remainder that fiscal year. It's been the city's practice to do so in past years, and we would continue to make sure employees stay within their range.
Could you perhaps bring up the slide on our COLA and merit increases over the years? I'll just make a quick point. So Alderwoman Schneider, you made the comment about COLA being universal across the board. These same numbers over that whole period in the company I work in were 3% COLA, 1% merit. And this is consistently under what private sector has done, at least in my experience. I see Alderman Bach shaking his head. And I think we've got this class and comp study that's kind of reset it for today's market, but we found that because of that disparity, that many people are behind, because we've been a little behind for a number of years because of budget constraints, et cetera. So that's just bringing a little bit of my personal experience in from where I've worked for a long time, and they get farther and farther and farther behind, and then they start to say, hey, I'm behind, I'm going to start looking for a job elsewhere, and then we get into the cycle of trying to find new people, which is expensive in and of itself.
One other point for the Common Council, or the committee rather, to just be aware of, and we'll certainly bring this up as we head into the budget workshop meetings starting next month. As we go through our annual budgeting process and we begin to formulate the draft budget that is recommended for consideration by the Appropriations Committee, there are other organization-wide costs, and this is no different from any private sector company or organization, relative to employee insurance, health and dental, as well on the public sector side as retirement contributions as mandated by the Wisconsin retirement system. We are often handed with increases that are 6, 7, 8% on the health insurance side and or the retirement contribution side that we have to satisfy as a mandate for retirement purposes or pension purposes, and to continue to provide insurance for our employees as well as their families. In my time here, which is almost 9 years, we have never passed along an increase for retirement contributions or health or dental insurance contributions to our employees. We've been able to satisfy those increases as an organization on behalf of our employees. So while the pay adjustments may not be in line with what we've seen from a private sector perspective, we are doing right by our employees in terms of maintaining the existing levels of coverage for health and dental insurance, as well as the promise we make to them through the Wisconsin retirement system. So I just want to make sure that that point is out there and on the table.
That's an excellent point. In my time, I pay about double now what I did 10 years ago for my insurance out of my pocket, but we've had some pay adjustments to keep up with it, so we're helping out where we can. Thanks for that color commentary. Alderman Meyer.
Just real quick, the one-time adjustment for longevity, not a real fan of it, but I'd be more of a fan of that if there was a longevity type of program set up. It wasn't just a one-time shot for us to do it 1 year and that's it, but something that would be, be incremental for the number of years, but a whole program for it, not just a one shot. So something that the employees can look forward to as them being there for 5 years. I'm here for 4 years now. In the 5th year, I'm going to get this, and in the 6th year, I'm going to get this for it. I know we normally do our COLA and we do stuff like that, but the little additional for that longevity, I think, would help retain people a little bit more instead of. And I'm not saying people do this, but also get a one-time shot of 5 years, and they're thinking about going, well, I'll stay until that date, and then it's going to be it. But if they take a look and say, hey, down the road, I'm going to be getting this, this, and this for my longevity, that might help us retain some more people instead of just that one-time shot. I think it'd be better to have some kind of program set up. Don't know what it is, but having a program set up so we could
I think that's exactly what Justin's proposing. So there's the one-time shot now, and then it gets reevaluated every 6 years as the employees stay on. If they're not keeping up with progressing through their pay bands as...
Well, I think we have to do something different than every 6 years inside of that for it. I think there's something that's a shorter term than that for that.
Oh, we could propose doing it on a shorter cadence too, but...
It becomes just a higher annual cost. So it gets to the fiscal ability and
I think
find the right median.
If I understood the intent of what we're proposing implementing, it would be to catch people up and then evaluate it over time to make sure they continue through their pay band. So if they're just starting out there in the bottom 25%, and we want to make sure by the time they're a tenured employee, I forget 12 years down the road, that they're getting into the third quartile or above the third going into the fourth. And that this program is intended to make sure that no one slips through the cracks, because we could, 2 years from now, we could have another horrible year like COVID and something happens and our finances go to hell and then everyone starts to fall behind again. But then a few years out, there's at least a stopgap measure to reevaluate. It's programmed into our cadence now. Maybe 6 years isn't right, but go ahead.
We can certainly bring back other scenarios that do not play off of the 6-year increments that Assistant Administrator Shinneman has proposed here this evening. But just remember that whatever we propose or commit to and then ultimately communicate to our employees, there's going to be an understood commitment on the part of the organization to meet that obligation on a year-over-year basis. And so we're happy to bring back a 5-year increment or a 4-year increment. Every 4 years you move to a different gradient within your pay scale. But we have to remember that we're going to have to pay for that promise on a year-over-year basis. And when there may not be an interest in raising taxes or raising the tax rate, or the tax levy is not available to provide for that, then we may create some other issues for ourselves budgetarily. So we're trying to be fiscally responsible with the increments as proposed up on the screen, but we can bring back another number if that's what the council would like to see going into budget.
I think maybe the nature of Alderman Meyer's comment is you could maybe, instead of breaking it up into quarters, make the increment smaller but then do it more frequently. It could maybe end up being cost similar. Instead of waiting to get to the first quartile, maybe break it up into 20% bands and do it every 4 years. I think we're shooting that, most by the time someone gets 12 years out, they're getting into the fourth quartile. But we could break it up into different pieces and do it at a shorter increment. And maybe that's
Yeah, if you look at it doing every 6 years, I mean, you got a pretty good chunk every 6 years that you got to take a look at.
Yeah,
If you have smaller increments as you go along to do that,
maybe doing it more frequently would make sure we hold ourselves more accountable.
correct?
We will go back to the drawing board on that piece.
I think that's fair. I think you could probably structure it where it's not a huge cost burden because people won't fall behind as frequently if we do it more frequently. So hopefully we're just keeping up with it more. Alderman Gephardt.
Just a quick comment on that. I think that as Alderman Mayer was thinking about it, an incentive is something that people know about that they can go ahead and hit, right? If we're just going to go ahead and look at this at a period of time, 5 years, 6 years, it really isn't an incentive. It's, as we talked about, more of a catch-up, if you will. But maybe thinking of it in terms of an incentive on how we can tie that into more of a retention policy might make some sense. And as you pointed out, Mayor, it might at the end of the day, as we look over maybe a longer period of time, it comes out to be pretty much the same.
Another way we can control that is give that some consideration when we do appropriations every year, because to a certain extent we control that. It's always a little easy to forget about. The other 9 or 10 months out of the year we're not focused on budget, but it's about to, as we'll discuss in a minute, it's about to get pretty heavy in the budget season here, so there'll be a lot of meetings on what our budget will be next year, and then that always affects out years as well. So any other feedback on that, or should we move on? Is there Alderman Hancher?
What you're proposing is not uncommon. If you look at public sector jobs, they're doing that they're doing that in school districts all along southeastern Wisconsin. In the school district that I taught at in Wauwatosa, they just did that, where they have so many. If you've been in the district so many years, you get a bonus for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. So it's not an uncommon thing. The only question is, if you want to restructure it to make it ongoing, that would be the only other thing. But you have to do it, because otherwise you're going to find yourself losing 20% of your staff, 10%. In Tosa they were losing 20% of their staff every year, turnover, because they were not keeping up with their salaries, and they just did it just now, where they revamped everything. So you have to do it in order to make a stable workforce.
Thank you. Any other comments, or we ready to move on? You got enough direction, Justin?
I do. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, we have a few short informational items. The first is the Committee of the Whole planning calendar. So Will has put together a preview of coming attractions for the Committee of the Whole, so we can see what's coming down the pike. And then as you get a few months out, you can see there begin to be gaps in the calendars, and if we have ideas, we can fill the gaps. We can provide ideas to staff to put on here for the coming months, and if we want to maybe reprioritize these, we can bring the discussion items here to maybe reprioritize some of this to the extent we can at the staff level, maybe shift this around a little bit. I know it's not always possible because of other things that are going on, but then we could have those conversations here, and then we can kind of shape our, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure book. We can control where this discussion goes going forward. So I don't think we need any feedback on this now, other than know the list exists, and if we want ideas to go in here, we can put them on the calendar, and then if there's conflicts with priorities, we can set what the agenda is to a large extent here by deciding what our own priorities are.
And just to add, Mayor, we will be including this planning calendar in subsequent Committee of the Whole meeting packets on a going forward basis, so that the council can continue to be aware of what's looming in future meetings.
All right, so if there's, I don't think we need any feedback, but if there is, we can send the ideas to Will and my attention, and we can work on this and revising it going forward. Very good. We'll then move on to the 2024 budget development calendar. We have that up behind us, or everyone's got it in front of them. This is just a cadence of what staff and us are going to go through in the coming months for budget season, and there's a few meetings proposed coming up in the month of August. Especially for some of us who maybe is our first budget cycle, there will be a few meetings to do a little budget development and get some input early into the process. So there's some proposed dates and times there. The workshop meetings. Not all of these. I think the budget workshop meetings. We're proposing having a couple of them between August and early September. So the times, it'll probably be around 6 o'clock. It'll be probably a Tuesday or Thursday night, I'm guessing, if history repeats itself.
Assuming there are no concerns with the calendar as laid out here in the packet, staff will begin reaching out to members of the council to determine availability for those 2 workshop meetings between August 21st and September 7th here in the next week or so. The other date I would call out, or set of dates, is on the second page of the calendar. That's typically when we convene a meeting of the Appropriations Committee to consider the proposed budget. We've included many dates in early October, going all the way out into mid-October as part of our determination process for the council's availability. We'll also be looking to get that date on the calendar when it's convenient for most, if not all, council members to attend. So just want to give you a heads up regarding the draft schedule and some of the dates where we're going to need this group to get together to help us move along on some of the decisions that'll be critical to the overall spending plan that you'll seek to approve later this fall in November.
So nothing to put on our calendars at this point. You're going to get back to us to schedule and when you need us.
Absolutely, and we want to be very respectful of your time and your respective schedules. Based on this budget development schedule, you should anticipate 3 nights outside of your normal council meeting duties on the second Tuesday of the month. That would be the 2 workshop meetings in late August through early September, and then that special appropriations committee meeting in early to mid-October.
So if there's any dates in those ranges where you're not available, it might be appropriate to get them to staff sooner than later. But I know I've got a couple of the self-reports, so just check your calendars, and we're going to kind of march to the beat of this drum here because all the other dates are provided for context, so you know what staff's timeline is and what they have to deal with, and then we do have to get tax bills out at the end, and that's the ultimate deadline that pushes this calendar. So please review that and get back to Will appropriately.
Alderman Bach, I think you're referring to a date in early 2024, February 13th, which is a normal Common Council meeting day. Just as a placeholder on the 2024 Committee of the Whole planning calendar, we included an all-day strategic planning workshop at a date and time to be determined that really flows from the strategic planning discussion we had last month during Committee of the Whole. We just want to get that placeholder on the calendar. Again, more information to come as we move towards the end of the year.
All right, and our last item, if there's no more questions, is an update on Town Center TID 3, project expenditure update. Thanks, Justin. You have anything for us, Kim, just real quickly? Are there any questions on what was presented in the packet? We're only $8,000 over the budget before contingency, so we're well within our contingency funds we had set aside.
We thought we'd provide this update now and then probably again at the end of September, just so we're continuing to update and keep everyone informed on the progress.
Are there any questions? Are we good on the update? Hearing none, I think we're on to future policy items. If there are none now, we can provide them later. Are there any to report? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned, and we'll immediately reconvene as the Common Council. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and let's do the pledge. We can let the roll reflect that everyone was here for the last meeting, is still here for this meeting. And that brings us to our first item, a public hearing, ordinance 2023-1651, an ordinance amending section 58-441, print 11 of the Mequon Municipal Zoning Code related to residential parking requirements. This was recommended by Public Welfare on April 11th, recommended by Planning Commission on May 24th, and we had a first reading last month at the June 13th Common Council meeting. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now in public hearing. Is there anyone here tonight who wishes to speak on this topic? Hearing and seeing none, is there a motion?
Move to close public hearing.
Motion to close. Second. All in favor of closing public hearing, please say aye. We are now back. Are there any questions or comments on the proposed ordinance? Or is there a motion?
Motion to approve ordinance 2023-1651.
There's a motion and a second. We've seen this one a couple times. Are there any questions of staff or things we'd like to iron out? Or if there aren't, we can always go right to a vote. Hearing and seeing no comments, why don't we call the roll?
Alderman Talaco. Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Hancher.
Aye.
Alderman Bach.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Gebhardt.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next, we have personal appearances and public comment. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. If you desire to be heard on agenda items, you may be heard when those items are considered on the agenda. Please speak into the mic at the podium. Time limit is 5 minutes. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak on any matter not on the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to public officials' reports. I don't have anything this evening. Do you, Mr. Administrator?
Yes, just a couple of quick items. Mayor and members of the council, as you will all recall, as of January 1st, the city has consolidated its emergency dispatch operations with Ozaukee County, specifically the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office. The city attorney, the police chief, and myself recently visited with the Ozaukee County Sheriff, and during our meeting to check on the progress of this consolidation, which is going very well from the county's perspective, it was shared with us that they are continuing to hire dispatchers under the consolidated facility that is maintained and managed in Port Washington. Currently, the county is paying $24.50 an hour for dispatchers, individuals who are interested in such a job or a career, along with a $3,000 signing bonus. Job duties, available benefits, and applications are available on the Ozaukee County website for anyone interested in employment with the county. Secondly, and as was reported last week in our weekly bulletin, the city received the 2023 Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association just last week. This award recognizes the city's efforts to fashion a budget that is not only a policy document and financial plan, but also an operational guide and a communications device. This is the 14th consecutive year that the city has received this award from the Government Finance Officers Association. And lastly, absentee voting for the July 18th special election continues here at City Hall through Friday of this week, Friday, July 14th. The July 18th special election will occur next week for the 24th Assembly District, the seat previously held by Senator Dan Knodel, who was formerly the state representative for that district. Polls will be open next Tuesday from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m., and Assembly District 24 covers portions of aldermanic districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here in Mequon. That's my report, Mayor.
Thank you. Next up, we have the consent agenda. We have 13 sets of minutes from various boards and commissions. Is there a motion to approve or any items we'd like
Move to
removed?
approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the consent agenda is approved. Next is ordinances. We have none. Next, there are resolutions, also none, which is extremely rare. Previous or specified business from prior meetings, there is also none. We do have some new business. An aldermanic appointment of Stephen DeGuire to the Ethics Board from District 4. Is there a motion to approve that appointment?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that appointment is approved, which brings us to our last item tonight, a potential closed session. 7421 Ridgeview Drive, Yosef Barada. Common Council may convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85 Prin 1 Prin G for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, and then may reconvene into open session to take such action as deemed appropriate. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Move to go in closed session.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye when your name is called.
Alderman Meyer. Aye. Alderman Hancher.
Aye.
Alderman Parrish is absent. Alderman Bach.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Gebhardt.
Aye.
Alderman Telacco. Mayor Nurbin.
Aye. We'll now go into closed session. I don't anticipate we'll come back and close this meeting in open session. Good night, everyone.